All right, good afternoon. My name is Catherine Madden, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Care Teams 2007 to 2017, What Has Changed, How Have We Adapted, and What Does the Future Hold? A decade of critical incident response and management on college campuses. This webinar is sponsored by the ACPA Commission for Academic Affairs and Commission for Counseling and Psychological Services. All participants will remain in listen-only mode during the webinar. Throughout the panel presentation, we invite you to enter any questions you have via the chat box, which we will then share with the panelists during our Q&A session at the end of the event. A recording of today's webinar will be available on the ACPA website. Our webinar today will be moderated by Dr. Jennifer Buchanan. Jennifer is the Associate Vice President for Faculty Development and Advancement at Florida State University, where she co-chairs the Student Situation Resolution Team. She has also served as an Associate Dean in the College of Communication and has held various positions in the Division of Student Affairs, including Associate Dean of Students. Jennifer earned her Master's in Student Personnel Work from The Ohio State University and her PhD in Communication Theory and Research from Florida State University. We're pleased to have Jennifer here with us today to facilitate this conversation.
Thank you, Katie. Before introducing today's panelists, I'm going to use a slide that you see below on your screen to illustrate a caveat about the words that we chose to describe today's program. I describe this as kind of a Venn diagram gone wild to illustrate that there are lots of different names that we use across our campuses and even on our own campuses to describe the various teams that we use in terms of both monitoring, caring for, and intervening with our students. The emphasis in these of the energy in these different teams does vary, as you see as you look around that what ended up looking like a flower to me. But I wanted to illustrate that there is overlap certainly between the work of these various teams. So we wanted you to know that even though we chose one word because we needed to have one term to describe teams, as we put this together, this program together, we wanted to make sure that if your team isn't called that on your campus, if you have a team with a slightly different emphasis, we're talking about and with you about your teams. And we want to make sure you know that you can ask questions related to your specific team. Hopefully our responses will be general enough to cover the range of various ways that we care for our students on campus through these teams. And you probably can't see the citation at the bottom of the slide, but I just want to thank Brett Sokolow and Scott Lewis for laying out and categorizing all these different types of teams for me so that I could have a great reference to share with you and create my little flower. So let's move right on because we only have an hour and we have some wonderful guests. So let's meet our distinguished panel. Dr. Eugene Jarsky II, aka Gene, as I've always known him, became Vice President for Student Affairs at DePaul University in 2014. He also served as Vice President and Dean of Students at Roanoke College and in other administrative roles at the University of Florida, University of Tennessee, and Texas A&M University. While serving as Associate Director of Student Life at Texas A&M, he was heavily involved in the response to the bonfire. And those of you in my generation will remember that well, and that's when I first got to know Gene. He chaired the response team, served as a member of the University Counseling Resource Network and the Emergency Operations Team at the University of Florida. At Roanoke College, he led the campus's crisis management initiatives, and he's also co-authored 2 books on crisis management and has co-edited the book In Search of Safer Campuses, Emerging Practices for Student Affairs in Addressing Campus Violence, which was published by NASPA. Welcome, Gene.
Good afternoon.
Yes, Jackie Carr-McCarr serves as Dean of Students at University of North Carolina, Asheville. She has 20 years of experience in student affairs, student conduct, residence life, advising Greek life student organizations, and the first-year experience at UNC Asheville and other institutions such as Ohio University, Appalachian State University, and Western Carolina University. Have those mountains covered, right?
Covered.
As Dean of Students, she chairs UNC Asheville's Care and Crisis team, with other areas of responsibility for her, including residential education, citizenship education, parent and transition programs, and the first year experience. Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Jen Day Shaw is Associate VP and Dean of Students at the University of Florida, the other institution in Florida, with oversight responsibilities for student conduct and conflict resolution, the Disability Resource Center, new student and family programs, the Student Veterans Success Center, the Learning Commons, Career Closet, and Food Pantry. We just started a Career Closet too, as well as a broad range of services for students in distress, including managing the 24-hour crisis response for the campus, serving as chair of the behavioral consultation team, the crisis response team, the protest team, and the emergency deans group. In all her spare time, Jen is also the NASPA liaison to IACLEA, the public policy chair for the campus safety knowledge community, and is on the panel of experts for the VTV Family Foundation, created by the families of the survivors of the Virginia Tech tragedy. She presents and consults widely regarding threat assessment and has recently been published with 2 book chapters on the topic. We're so fortunate that Jen has found time in her busy schedule to share that experience with us. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Dr. John Davenport is currently the Dean of Students at Illinois State University, having also served as Associate Dean and Interim Dean. He says that he stumbled into the field as an undergraduate over 20 years ago in the residence halls, who didn't, and has held staff and student affairs positions at Eastern Illinois University and the University of Missouri. His current duties include serving as a member of the Student Affairs Executive Leadership Team, co-chairing the American Democracy Project, and coordinating the Illinois State Redbird Care and Inclusive Community Response Teams. Welcome, John.
Glad to be here.
So during our pre-discussion, when we talked about the ideas for this panel discussion, Jackie, you mentioned a concept that I thought was very interesting, and I'd like to ask you to talk about that with us. It was when you were asked what has changed on college campuses since the days of Virginia Tech, you mentioned having to manage a culture of fear on campus. Could you talk with the group about that?
Absolutely. At least in my experience, I feel post Virginia Tech, there's, at least in my perception, a lot more media coverage of acts of mass violence, but that the acts of at least mass shootings really are real and increasing. With as recent, sadly, as yesterday, it's constantly in the news. Looking at some research that I fingered through, the rate of mass shootings has quadrupled since 2011. So this is our reality, but it's also our students' reality. And I find that with the increased coverage of these acts of violence and a lower threshold of what we look at as concerning behavior on a college campus, it leads to an increased level of fear amongst our students and our faculty and staff. So I think I'm finding faculty and staff are much more nervous working with students that present that they could be a concern, or if an argument gets really heated in class, folks are much more apprehensive in saying anything because I don't want to upset somebody. What if they come back? They'll bring a gun. I don't know what's going on in this student's life. But I also think even students telling somebody about a student they're concerned about, I think, at least for me, they're more open to do so because they're worried, but they're much less willing to want to be involved because of a fear that something will happen. The way I see this trickle into our care and crisis teams and the teams that we work with is I think sometimes we have to work extra hard in our leadership of these teams and our involvement to make sure we're making sound decisions on behavioral intervention and threat assessment based on the reality of what's going on with that student and what's real knowledge and not what we're afraid could happen, maybe if, because this person kind of sort of reminds us of something that happened over here, but what if this happens? We have to really remind ourselves that we have to work with what we have at hand. And I find it's increasingly hard, even for myself, and I feel like I should have a good handle on that by now.
Yeah, you've been exposed to enough that your threshold should be different. Yeah. So you have a hypersensitive climate out there on campus. And then do you ever find that it invades your actual team, the members of that team?
Absolutely. I think there's a constant fear of making the wrong decision and something happening. And we have to acknowledge that we're in a very litigious age. And so that's often a fear that's underlining. We don't want a loss of life. We don't want damage to a student and what they're doing, but we don't want something to go wrong and we think we tried our best. And so I think that's hard for teams to balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, and all of this, of course, in the context, especially in some states, of loosening of gun control laws, right?
And I'm in North Carolina, and we've got a couple of pieces of legislation floating around in Raleigh that are of concern, and I know that we're not alone.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's an element of the climate and the society, really, that you think has changed and that has impacted teams. What else has changed about students, Jackie, that you think is worth commenting on?
I think more students are coming to our campus with more complex mental health and life issues. I think we've seen an upward trend of everyone goes to college, and whether or not they're fully prepared with regards to the resources or their very own capability to be successful in what is a stressful environment when you're well, becomes even more challenging if you're unwell, but also the need for college students to advocate on their own behalf. It can be very hard if that's not been something the framework has had them do in the past. We see that a lot when it comes to accommodations, that students don't seek that out once they're out of the K-12 system because it's self-initiated in higher ed. I think our students are more open to seeking help, at least in my experience on my campuses, and they're more open to talking about what's going on, but that very act of being very verbal about their dark thoughts, previous maybe harmful behavior can be very overwhelming for your campus community, your faculty, your staff, and fellow students.
Yeah, it goes right back to what you first said, in that it triggers those sensitivities of everyone around them in the residence hall or classes or whatever the context.
Very much so, very much so.
I guess the good news is some of the stigma seems to be eroding about seeking help. And 10, especially 20 years ago, that was a big issue that student affairs practitioners needed to work with.
Very much.
Now we have almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that later. We'll talk much more about that and the structural stresses that are placed because of that.
Yeah.
So let's turn to something that people might have thought of automatically when they saw our topic, and that is technology. Jean, what are your thoughts about how technology has impacted care teams over the past 10 years? What's changed and how has it affected us?
Well, if you think about technology and what has changed in the last 10 years, it's been a pretty dramatic increase in not only the availability of the PDA device that everybody has in their hand and the smartphones, but certainly our own ability to collect information and get reports. I think when in the early days of care teams, we spent a lot of time talking to faculty, staff, and students throughout the campus community, encouraging them to call the care team, to call the Dean of Students office. And we still get a lot of reports through phone calls, but I think more and more today we're seeing it through email. Many campuses have adopted a online case management system. There are several different software vendors that work in the higher ed arena that provide tools that are pretty commonplace in most of our campuses. I won't go through the specific names of those, but I think most every campus has moved to developing a system to where people can report online through, and oftentimes in an anonymous way, to report information about behaviors or situations that they find concerning, alarming, or they feel threatened or fearful of. And those reports begin the process for many teams in beginning to dig into a situation and learn more about it. I think, you know, part of this has created that same idea of how we store this information and how we manage this information when it comes in. Again, just a few years ago, I think many people have tried a number of different tools, and from Word documents and spreadsheets to developing a wiki within your campus computer system to be able to track students and your follow-up with regards to that. But we also understand that those records that we maintain are educational records. And so what we include in them needs to be an appropriate kind of information and factual information, because at some point a student could request to see that information, and we've got to be sure that what we're putting in there is relevant to the situation, but also talks about the strategies that we're taking. So often it's been a case of taking a report and logging the incident itself, but it's also important for you to note what specific steps and actions your team took to respond, intervene, and try to address that situation. Email again becomes one of those things that so many people utilize to communicate situations to a care team, and how you manage that email system, what kinds of responses you provide to people are pretty important. I think for most of us, trying to get that personal contact with people is still something that we want to do, and it may be a great first step to get the report, but that follow-up via phone and personal meeting is going to be really important to understand the true intensity of the situation and really engage in a deeper dialogue so that you understand what it is that they're concerned about and what types of behaviors you're trying to follow up on.
Especially in light of what Jackie talked about the sensitivities that are out there, to reassure the person who's reporting to you, to help them feel safe, to bring the emotional content level down so that you can get at the facts and figure out what kind of situation you're dealing with.
Exactly, and certainly these systems are wonderful tools for us, but we know that through these virtual communications, it's difficult to convey a tone, express any kind of real emotion. And when you're dealing with somebody who's upset, scared, worried, that ability to have some personal interaction with them and acknowledge those feelings and emotions, but at the same time, get the facts that you need to be able to follow up on a situation is really important.
Yeah. What about how students are interacting these days, Jean, or anybody else who wants to comment on it? What has changed about that, aside from everything? In 10 years?
I think social media has really exploded. It's, I'll hear from students, emails for old people, and texting is a tool that they use quite a bit, but again, that's a very personal kind of space that students, some are willing to let the institution engage in, but that needs to be more, for most of them, they want it to be more of an opt-in kind of situation. I want to communicate with you via email about the things that are important to me. As it relates to, and I apologize.
We're all trying to figure out if it's ours. Thank you.
But social media, the Facebook, Twitter world is one where our students live in a very real way. I hear from many students that want to get more communication and more information from the university via social media. Why aren't we sending out alerts via Twitter? Why aren't we communicating what's happening with campus culture and campus climate and the responses the university is acting on through those media? And for us, it's a place that students want us to be in, but then at the same time, it's difficult for us to monitor and be in that space for, on my campus, 24,000 students, on Jen's campus, 50,000 students, to really see what's going on. But certainly many of the reports we get have to do with social media exchanges that students are having. For many campuses, and I know my own included, when we deal with some of the issues about bias and racial harassment, we see a lot of that coming up in the social media world and being able to try to respond and address those things when in reality the university has little to no control over those particular environments. Makes it especially difficult.
Lots of access to, so about all those liability concerns, but very little control, right? Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on social media and what it means for teams?
It has really resulted in a new way for us to find out more information about a person of concern. I think all of us would agree one of the first things that we do when we get information about someone is do a social media search to see, how is that person presenting themselves? What kinds of groups are they affiliated with? So it's a helpful tool from especially a threat assessment perspective.
Absolutely. That's the point I was hoping would come out, and it really sort of turns the tables, doesn't it? 10 years ago, you're trying to find information. You had a dearth of information. Now you have such a wealth of information through those outlets and others that it's kind of hard. The challenge becomes sorting through and figuring out what's going to be helpful to you in that sea.
And that was the part I was going to make, is there is such a wealth of information, but even with those social media posts, you have to really analyze and review is, what's the context and the nature of that? Is that something that is truly a threatening kind of situation? Again, it can be easily misinterpreted, but it's something that you can't necessarily ignore either.
Absolutely. And that's where experience comes in too, and some knowledge of the context. So Jen, let's talk about what's changed in terms of how students are being helped. Where does the help come from in the structure in the past 10 years?
So I know most of you that are watching our webinar are probably familiar with the reports that came out after the Virginia Tech tragedy. And one of the common themes was about the ability to manage all the information across a campus and making sure that there really is a hub for that information so that we're able to look for patterns of behavior so that, one instance of acting out in class may not be that alarming, but when you also combine that with a substance related issue and threatening behavior in another class and a stalking behavior with a student in the residence hall, suddenly the person of concern is raising up in terms of how the team might intervene. So, what I've seen become much more common is a way to market either a team, or here at the University of Florida, we have a model called You Matter, We Care, and other campuses have similar things, South Dakota Cares and UNCG Cares, and whatever name that we're all using. It is a way to teach our students and faculty and staff, and really importantly on our campus, our families, to notice students in distress and get that information to one place. And usually that place serves on the team, and so they're responsible for bringing that information that comes in that direction, and you combine that with the police reports and the residence hall reports and faculty calling and the different ways that you might be getting information from your campus, and then suddenly you've got a really good picture of a student for our team, student, faculty, staff, or visitor of concern, and how those patterns of behavior are playing out on your campus. So here at the University of Florida, we're lucky enough to have what we call the CARE team, predominantly social workers. They're here in the Dean of Students office, and their first and most important responsibility is all the follow-up with our students of concern that come through our behavioral consultation team, which is our combined CARE threat assessment team. Other campuses, I know FSU does this, and others, it might be student affairs professionals, it might be social workers, but that team is responsible for taking in information, also doing some programming out on campus about recognizing signs of distress and how to respond to that, but also feeding information to the team and then taking information back from the team and serving as that follow-up. Prior to when we established this group, it really fell to me, associate deans, all of us that were already wearing a lot of hats were doing all this follow-up with students of concern, and then there were a lot of students that fell through the cracks. So 6 months out, we had been meeting with them weekly, and they seemed to be doing okay, and they sort of fell off the list because so many other students came in, and then a year later they're back on the list in even a more serious crisis situation. So those of us who are lucky enough to have these case manager type positions, whose whole responsibility is really being a whole person support to these students of concern, it's the data that we're showing is we're catching it before it becomes a crisis. They're able to work with a wide variety of campus and community resources to help this student, and then we keep it from, we believe, getting to that crisis situation that is so scary for all of us.
That's an excellent innovation, Jen. And one thing that was new even to me, and we have case managers here who are operating very effectively, is the notion of having those case managers do some educational outreach also. I don't think that's something that we have done yet. I could be wrong. So anybody from FSU listening, sorry if I got that wrong, but that's a wonderful idea. Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder to our participants out there, you may enter questions in the chat function. So you should see that on your screen. Feel free to send us questions. We have obviously plenty of thoughts, plenty of material, but we would love to hear what you have to say and what you, how you'd like to comment or ask a question of our panelists. So let's talk a little bit more about teams, John, and putting together teams in ways that really do capture the complexity of what we have going on our campuses. What are your thoughts about that?
And I think where I'd like to start off is a point that Jackie alluded to from the very beginning, in that we need to have as complete a picture as possible of behaviors and things like that. And so what we found when we did a lot of benchmarking and determining the composition of our team is we sat down and had the conversation, what allows us in one given room to combine most student factors or vectors that we can. And so for us, and we modeled this off of a lot of different places. For us, it's someone from the counseling center, someone from our student health, and we're at a place where those are two separate departments. Our university police are involved. Our residence life staff, our director of student conduct, and also for us, which is different from what some teams do, is we have someone from our university college who works in very close consultation with general advisors and all the academic advisors. Mm-hmm. And what we thought about with that particular configuration is a name comes up and we can check, our conduct director can check previous conduct cases, our police officer can check any previous discipline external to campus and on campus. Obviously, counseling and health have some restrictions in what they can share, but by being in the room, being in a conversation, they can talk hypothetically in which a student dealing with certain particular stressors, how they might react or what actions they might be taking or how concerning we might view certain actions that they have. For us, we are a largely residential campus with a freshman and sophomore requirement. And so housing is vital because a huge number of our students are in the residence halls, and so have contact with the case manager the university housing has, as well as the live-in hall staff. And also, again, what I found very important is the sharing of communication, because we have the agreement when we're in that room, again, with the exception of the medical professionals, we share openly and freely based on need to know among the different agencies. There are also some things, some databases that different people can bring to the table. And so at a moment's notice, when we put out a name, you can have someone from our university college pulling up what that student's mid-semester grade reports are and how they're doing academically, and any notes that their advisor has put into the system through a shared database. Same thing, we use a case management system. So in student conduct, we can pull up what are the interactions that person has had with the case manager and talk through those things. And so it's really based on as many different points as we can pull together to give us information, the most complete picture that we can of a given student. And for us, we also keep a number of people what we consider in our bullpen. And so our access and accommodation services, student union, rec staff, our fraternity and sorority life staff. So again, our main team is about actions and behaviors, but in our bullpen, so to speak, is the people who manage our spaces on campus, because we know this is where a lot of things take place. Again, on the campus, we're relatively dense and everything's pretty closely connected. So for us, that diversity of forming a team was all about creating the most complete picture possible at the quickest time possible, because we don't want to have to pick up the phone and call and ask, well, what do you know about this particular person? And so what we believe, and there may be one or two, but pretty much every student access database on campus is represented in our room. And so when we meet, and we meet weekly, as well as if called together as need to. But from our perspective, if there's information out there, we pretty much have access to it based on people in the room. And that's what we found as a model that a lot of different places we're using and works most effectively for us.
Great. Couple of follow-ups on that, John. When you said university college, is that what I would understand as undergraduate studies, somebody from the dean's office there?
Well, actually, for us, university colleges, is under academic affairs, and they provide incoming students academic advisement and course management and assistance as they move forward. Once they get into a specific major, they're into a different college, but university college still maintains those advising ties. I mean, they're like our utility infielders on the academic side. They know a bit about everything, every major, every department, things like that.
So that's how we would call it undergraduate studies here, basic division. So I just wanted to clarify that. I love the bullpen concept, and one of the folks we have in our bullpen here at Florida State is international affairs, because we find that often graduate students, especially who are international, end up having some issues, some concerns, some barriers that are different, and that really helps us to have that person. And my second follow-up is just a quick one about having that academic person on your team as a regular member. When we had our pre-discussion, I think we found out that very few of our panelists have an academic person as or more as a permanent member of their team. So anybody else want to comment, or do you want to comment, John, on the value beyond just knowing where that person is in their academic career of having an academic person on your team? One quick comment, at Florida State, we co-chair, so academic affairs and student affairs co-chair, and that's why I'm involved as a recovered student affairs person. Also, I mean, I'm half student affairs and half academic affairs, so I'm a good liaison, but we plan to keep that model forever, even after I'm long gone.
We've found it to be wonderful because frequently the initial concern may come in as an early alert or an academic alert. So it's a very seamless and not intimidating way for our one-stop, who are our academic advising kind of oversight group, to reach out to that student. And with the director of that program being on our team, they kind of know all the stuff already. So it's made it really we found it really helpful for that link to be there. And we think we've caught more students because they've been part of our team.
More integrated.
Much more.
And one thing that for us that we're also finding is all of us can track things basically by calendar on our campuses. Certain stressors tend to manifest at certain times. But where we were lacking knowledge is certain majors, let's just say, are more difficult. As a liberal arts and sciences major, I'll put myself out there. Some majors are more stringent to get into. So around those times when admissions for particular programs, and we notice a spike in students and undeclared students, we can kind of tie that back to things. So a benefit of academic trends that person is able to provide for us and let us know, well, this is what's going on right now, and so this is why we may be getting a lot from a particular area.
Absolutely, just being in tune with all aspects of the student's life.
One thing I might add to that is it may also depend on the nature of the team. A care team, college concern team may be focused more on some of the academic pieces, and I've seen some colleges where an academic advising network actually does that very same kind of thing about classroom concerns and students not doing well, and how do they do some academic outreach. There are many tools. There's some institutions use a program. Well, again, I don't want to use names, but there are different programs that people use to share information about academic concerns for students, and then the behavioral intervention, more of the students of concern kind of pieces fit in a better way, perhaps, in student affairs. And so some of it depends on how your teams are structured, the size of your institution. But I know that whenever there is a significant behavioral situation that then crosses with a classroom concern, engaging a representative from that college in the team and the conversation is something that many teams do on a more individualized basis.
Yep, let them know they're in the bullpen and then pull them in, right, to that discussion. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it depends, of course, on the culture of the institution, the overall culture of the institution. No matter how the team wants to operate, it needs to fit in well with the culture of that institution, or it's not going to be very successful.
Right.
So, John, let's talk about another issue that you brought up in the pre-discussion. anything changed about families in the past 10 years and how involved or not involved they are in their children's lives?
We, parent and family services is a part of our portfolio in the Dean of Students Office as well. And so we've been able to track pretty closely. In addition, we do a lot with AHEP, the Parent and Family Programs Association, to gather data. And what we're finding is, looping back up, and all of our topics are interconnected, social media has made it a lot more feasible for parents to at least feel that they're more connected with their students' lives. And so what we've noticed is responsiveness to their student social media posts. We've noticed that they're much quicker to find and reach out to us directly and ask us to take action or to intervene. And the great part about that, though, is we're able to talk, not specifically, but we can talk to parents and assure them there is a mechanism in place to do outreach. We can talk generally about some steps that we would take in a given situation. And this is how the university would respond on the academic side, on the student affairs side, if it's a housing issue with residents' life. And so for us, it has led to definitely more parental involvement and parental engagement. But it has given us a way to to calm a lot of the parents' fears. Another big part of it for us, I'm sure most institutions are the same, we have a Parent and Families Facebook page that we moderate to a certain extent. And so for us in the room, depending on how big an issue is, oftentimes we have that up on the screen and we're looking at that to see what parents are talking about. Most often it's incorrect, but they're talking about it. And so that gives us a general sense. But it also, again, gives us a way. We are part of periodical, updates to that page. Hey, these are the mechanisms in place that's to support your student if they're, having difficulty. So please be comfortable and aware that we have these things in place. And we also, every once in a while, have different administrators who will take some time and go onto that page and post things about their office. So because parents are more involved, we're finding, and going back to social media, what we try to do is be proactive and use social media as a way to push out information to our parents and families. Again, going back to that calendar concept, we know what issues are going to be big at given times. And so we try to stay a week or so ahead of that in terms of our communication with families and parents and putting things out. This is about to be coming up in your student lives. Be aware of it. We most certainly are. And this is how you can help us manage that and reduce stress and anxiety around certain things. So.
Yeah. It certainly is so important to acknowledge parents' concerns, to acknowledge that they're partners in the process these days, just very, very different from 10 years ago or 20 years ago when, you let them know your address, but that was about it. They're with us and they need attention also and deserve attention and support from the institution. Yep. Thank you. We have a question actually about family issues. And here's our question from a participant. At times, family/other personal support networks, not sure about that, but at times students may question, or their support networks, students' support networks, i.e. family, might have questions and question the ways that an institution is attending to concerns about a different student. So about a roommate or a friend, etc., when they consider a peer of their student to be a threat. We've all been in that circumstance. How do you believe that care teams can educate those in students' lives about what they do, even when they can't go into the details about to the extent that that parent might be satisfied with? So we can't share everything, of course, with those students, but how do we balance that out, trying to reassure those parents or other family members without giving too much information? Anybody want to respond to that?
I'm happy to.
Jen, go ahead.
So for us, of course, all of us, I think, run into this quite a bit, but we will say to the family, in a similar situation, we'll explain FERPA and why it's important to protect everybody's privacy, but we'll explain in a situation like this, we would typically, and then we'll talk through the kinds of support we're probably providing to the student of concern. And then of course, we're also offering support for their students. And so the care team that I spoke about earlier is reaching out to any of the impacted students as well, and maybe even the community in terms of a residence hall floor or sorority. And that has been so hugely helpful and really spreading that message of at UF, it's, you know, every Gator counts and everybody has a responsibility to look out for each other. And so, especially with the bigger student organizations, we'll notice a big uptick as soon as we've gone and talked about it's all of our responsibility. And if you keep it to yourself, you're not being a great friend and you're not, you know, protecting, obviously we're putting this in positive terms. And so that's been really helpful with those families. So from the beginning, we're talking about this is the kind of place that cares about our students. And so we're reminding that parent about, we know you're concerned about your own students. We're going to do everything we can to help your own student be successful, but recognize we're also doing that with the other student involved.
Other thoughts, John? You wanted to add something? Oh, sorry, Jean. Go ahead, Jean.
Jean, you can go ahead. Jean,
I was just going to simplify, you know, the easy takeaway in that is always that you can always talk about process. You just can't talk about the specifics of that situation. And so I think that's true with so many different questions we get from parents, from other students, from the student newspaper. You can always discuss process. You just can't discuss the specifics of that particular situation. And so that's a helpful tool. And like Jen said, I think a lot of us have those same messages and things. We refer to it as take care to Paul, take care of you, take care of others, take care to Paul. You know, those kinds of messages are important messages to engage everyone in the community so that they see that they're all part of our response processes.
John, what did they miss?
No, I think everything that was beautiful.
Okay, all right, very good. Jean, I'd like to ask you to sort of round out the more structured part of the program, talking about some broader societal changes in terms of how universities are viewed, what the expectations of universities are, and the broader sort of legal and societal context for our responses to students.
Sure. Well, as it relates to care teams, I think before Virginia Tech, there were a number of campuses that perhaps had some type of system like a care team in place. It wasn't new coming with Virginia Tech. One institution I was at, they used to refer to it as the Monday morning meeting. And it was really a part of the institution's student success and retention efforts to be there for students and address needs and try to intervene when students were struggling. But clearly, after Virginia Tech, it has definitely become the norm, and it's almost a situation of I won't say liable, but you know, it's unthinkable to not have some type of system in place in today's world to try to intervene. What we heard from the Virginia Tech situation was campuses needed systems and structures in place to begin to connect the dots, because oftentimes there are these isolated situations throughout the campus community that occur, and we need to develop a system where we can collect these reports, use the hub as Jen has referred to it, and connect the dots. Without those, it's one of those situations, whenever a crisis or an incident happens on a campus, you've always got the armchair quarterbacks that are sitting there saying, well, could they have seen this? How did they not recognize the signs? Why didn't the institution take some steps? And so it's easy to do that. You know, hindsight is always 20/20, but what can we do to make sure we're operating in the prevention efforts here, being on the forefront of the crisis management process to really try to intervene and address situations before they occur. I think one of the other pieces, I think for a while, FERPA became this piece that really limited us in being able to communicate and share information. I think since Virginia Tech, there's been kind of a loosening of understanding, not in the sense that it's not important, but when you have a true safety and security situation, that sharing with others within the campus community in particular, and also as we talked about family, engaging family in the process. While yes, there are those situations where engaging family can complicate the matter, in my experience, in most situations, we find that the family can be a very helpful resource in trying to address a situation and provide support and assistance to a student in many situations. I think on this, we've also come a long way in educating the campus community about these resources and about the existence of these teams. There's a greater propensity for people to submit reports and share information with us, and that is very good. At the same time, it can be a complicating factor because oftentimes it can be a slight situation in a classroom or in some environment that gets reported to the team, and there's this almost abdication of any kind of responsibility for dealing with it or addressing with it in that particular situation, and an expectation that this team is going to step in and resolve all the different problems. Mm-hmm. You know, anybody that's worked with students, you know that if a student gets a call out of the blue from the Dean of Students office or from some other office, it can actually exacerbate the situation and really inflame it. And oftentimes, the best first intervention winds up being that faculty, staff, or student that is in that situation who can help connect them with resources. And so many initial first steps is about working with the reporter to help provide them with information about how to communicate resources that are available and provide support for that person so that they get connected to the resources in a way that is more open to them, more comforting, as opposed to feel as though, you know, someone else in the administration is coming down to address this major problem. Oftentimes it needs that friendly, encouraging push to get people to go get the support and assistance that they need to address the situation. Those are a couple of my initial thoughts.
Okay, great. All the while balancing very delicately somebody's control over their own situation. For example, a faculty member who needs some intervention with a student. You know, that is a delicate balance to strike, because you don't want it to take over that faculty member's classroom. The faculty member needs to feel supported but not directed per se. Very, very difficult. And it strikes me that it's hidden work of the university in many respects. It's not really something that you put on your resume. Yeah, maybe you have that you head up this team, but it doesn't at all reflect the complexity of the work that you're all doing and that we're all doing at our own institutions. We have a question from the group, and maybe I'll pose this and ask you guys to go very quickly and just let us know. We'll start with you, Jackie. I don't know what order you're in on your screen, but I've got Jackie, Jen, Jean, skip me, and John. I would like to, or this person would like to know, if you could put your finger on the main thing that's changed in your teams in the past 10 years, what would you say?
Complexity of mental health issues.
Jen?
I just think because we've had so much experience, I just have seen teams across the country become so good at this. I'm so impressed with the work that all of our colleagues are doing.
Jean?
I would have to agree with the mental health issues that have come up and the challenges that we face in trying to provide the resources, but also work with students and families and find it in navigating what's best for that student at that time. Certainly, you know, people talk about the you know, withdrawal process being one where, you know, there's some kind of mandatory withdrawal process, but oftentimes, you know, the university can provide so much support, but where is that threshold where this is a time where it may be best for the student to sit out for a little while, get the support and assistance that they need, and then re-enter the academic environment. That continues to be a challenging piece for
yeah, absolutely. What about you, John?
I would say frequency. There was a time, I can think just 5 years ago, that, you know, our group, we get together, a couple of things to discuss. But now, you know, we're considering for next year expanding the time of our meeting because we have more and more cases that are actually rising to the level that are appropriate. And so I think just the frequency of the cases, the way that people are utilizing and outreaching to us is on the rise. And I think in some ways that taxes some teams a little bit.
I'm glad you mentioned that. We haven't talked much or at all about resources. My guess is that none of your budgets have doubled in the past 10 years, have they? Not. Resources haven't kept up, have they? and not only in Dean of Students departments, vice presidents for student affairs offices, but in counseling centers, right? So that's a reality. I think there has been some catching up with that going on in the state of Florida, but not enough, and we were way below where we needed to be anyway. So that is a reality, of course. What else? We have another question.
The system that Jen has with the ability to have case managers in the form of social workers working with that. Again, for smaller institutions, that may not be a reality within the budget and the confines of their staffing. I know for our own institution, as we see the cost of higher education increase, private institutions in particular, but all institutions are facing shifts in enrollment and budgets that are tightening as we try to be more efficient. And we're beginning to see this return to the generalist kind of position within student affairs and the ability to sustain very specialized roles, particularly at some of our smaller institutions, is just not a reality. And so trying to find the right mix and the right fit for your institution is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a wonderful model, but let me go ahead and pose a challenge to that model that comes from one of our participants out there. Are we unintentionally placing those case managers in mental health roles, making decisions about students' mental health functioning? And I would follow up with that with one of my catchphrases, which is, are we becoming day treatment?
So, I can speak from our experience here in past institutions I've worked. Just like for any of us, you have to be clear about what your role is and what the boundaries are. We have very close working relationships with our counseling center, our victim advocates, and other resources that we refer students to, but it's really a whole person approach. So I think you heard in the beginning when I was introduced, we've started in the last 2 years a food pantry because of food scarcity issues. So one of the things this team does is really address what are all the different pieces of barriers that are impacting students' ability to be successful. And our belief is that, and our data shows that we're actually improving retention, which for all of us tends to be tied to money, which then helps us make a better case for why these generalist kind of positions that Jean described are so essential. So, I think with the question that's posed, I think it's a misunderstanding of what these roles are. So there are case managers that are within counseling centers that are very different from what I'm describing. What I'm describing, and it goes back to the Virginia Tech reports, we have to have the ability to know when a student is in great distress, are they making use of resources? Because if we refer them to a counseling center and the student doesn't sign a release, we have no idea if they're under care. We don't know if they're continuing under care. If they're also working with a care team, case manager, whatever you want to call these roles, then they've got someone that's a university contact that's not only making sure that they're doing what they need to do to stay well, but also addressing some of those underlying barriers that may have led to them coming to our attention. So that we're trying to do every possible thing. So relationships and housing and finances and food and how to behave in the classroom and register with the Disability Resource Center and see the counseling center, so that those students are able to be successful on our campuses. To me, it's more of a challenge from the resource perspective, because some of these students are taking so much time with so many resources, and yet that is the key to letting them stay here and be successful and be retained and hopefully graduate.
Thank you. We have about 4 minutes left, and I need one of those minutes to completely wrap us up. What thoughts has this discussion triggered in panelists that you want to share at this point?
I think I'd like to say, in tying together some of the last points made, it's important that the approach to care be holistic within the university. Everything from your student code of conduct, what is a conduct issue versus what is a health and safety issue, resources properly aligned, and does our teams have reporting mechanisms that allow them to show their worth to the university, be it in retention or other factors. I just think the university has to be a one accord on the purpose, the values of the team, and what that team needs to be accomplishing in order for it to be effective.
Absolutely.
I would add to that the aspect of teams really being interconnected with other units within the institution. Again, as John has talked about, the care team is connected and coordinates with your student conduct process. Jen referred to her social workers, and they're an integral part of the team. Here for us, we have a student welfare task force that things get handed off from the care team to the student welfare task force to address the food insecurities, the housing insecurities, some of the financial needs, and begin to bring resources into that. The connections with the colleges about the classroom behavior. So teams are not islands unto themselves, but need to be really connected into the campus community. And I like Jen's word of hub, because I think you look at it as the hub of a wheel that has many spokes connecting to different parts of the institution to really best serve the whole needs of the student.
Yeah. How about you, Jackie? Anything?
I think for me, it's a reminder that this is really hard work and really important work, and that compassion fatigue is real. And so I think taking care of that centerpiece of the hub is really important as well. And I think that sometimes we forget that in the larger process.
Absolutely. We on our team, who's a good example of doing that, include someone from our employee assistance program, a counselor who's at the table for the team members, and is helpful in a lot of ways, but it's a good addition. So I am sorry that we didn't get to, and Jen, did you have anything else to add?
I agree with everything everyone else said.
Everything's good? Okay, all right. I'm sorry that we didn't get to all our questions. We had some fantastic questions from the audience, and we sure appreciate your participation. On behalf of ACPA, we would like to thank our incredible panelists. I think you'll agree with me that we ended up with a phenomenal panel for joining us today. And thanks to all of the however many, maybe 100 or so participants that we had out there across the country. I've certainly learned something, and I hope that you're taking away some important thoughts from this panel. Please look for future webinars on the ACPA website, and you can visit the websites for Commission for Academic Affairs and Commission for Counseling and Psychological Services at ACPA. So thank you again.